Hey folks, it's Miss Sinclair for AP World History Modern. Today we are continuing on with our Unit 3 lectures. If you remember, Unit 3 is on land empires and changing belief systems. And today we are going to be talking about Mughals and Safavids. So let's get started. I want you to think back to what you've learned about the Ottomans, and for your bell work today, tell me something about Ottoman culture, the Ottoman military, and the Ottoman demise. What's going to start removing them from power. Today, we're learning about the Mughals and the Safavids, our other two large gunpowder empires. So we're actually, even though this is lecture 3.1b, our objective actually comes from topic 3.3, thinking about belief systems. I want you to be able to explain the continuity and change within the various belief systems of the gunpowder empires during the period 1450 to 1750. So I want you to think about the belief systems in the Mughal and Safavid empires specifically as you take notes. So let's talk about the Safavids. If you remember, our three gunpowder empires are the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire, and the Mughal Empire. And they are called gunpowder empires because of their military dominance, their effective use of gunpowder and cannons in their military, and the way that they're really going to dominate the wider world economically, politically, and since all three of these empires will be Muslim, they lead what's sort of known as an Italian Renaissance, as Islamic Renaissance as well. So the Safavid Empire is going to be in what we consider to be modern-day Iran, but the territory that we've known for a long time as Persia. So this is immediately one key difference between the Ottomans and the Safavids. It's just ethnicity, right? They are going to speak Persian. They are going to be Shia. And the Safavid Empire will be founded in about 1500 by Ismail Safavi, who will declare Persia, what we know now as Iran, as a Shia state. So this is sort of new. We've had, of course, the Shia tradition around since the split between Abu Bakr and Ali back in the 7th century, but this is our first predominantly Shia political state. So just like the Ottomans and the Mughals, we will see that the Safavids will emerge out of Turkic nomadic groups after the Mongol invasions. But unlike those other two empires, they're also going to emerge out of a Sufi religious order. So we haven't talked a lot about Sufism, but Sufism is a branch of Islam that focuses a lot more on mysticism, on prayer. It is less focused on how to live your life and more focused on communing with God. And so there's going to be a really strong Sufi tradition in the Safavid Empire that we're not necessarily going to see as strongly in other places. We're also going to see that they are going to practice Shia Islam. This will really set Persia apart from their neighbors and allow them to develop their own identity. There is a belief in Shia Islam that you have this hidden imam, the rightful heir to Muhammad, and Ali will come again to rule. So, do you wait quietly, waiting for the hidden imam to return, or do you create a powerful political state? This will also represent a really sharp divide in the political and religious life in the heartland of Islam, because, of course, all of their neighbors will be Sunni. The Ottomans and the Mughals are both going to be Sunni. So we see that the ruler of the Safavid Empire will declare himself Shah, meaning king. And we will see that there is an ongoing military conflict between the Safavids and the Ottomans between 1534 to 1639. It's another basically century of warfare between the Ottomans and the Safavids. It's not nonstop fighting, but it's consistent military conflict between these two empires. It's really going to reflect both a territorial rivalry over the Caucasus region, as well as religious differences. You can make a strong comparison to the Protestant Catholic divide that we will see emerging in Europe. So, let's think a little bit about Safavid culture. Well, originally, they will use a Turkish language, but they will switch to Persian after the Battle of Chaldiran. They're going to lose to the Ottomans with this battle. And of course, the Ottomans are speaking Turkish. And so this is the governing state will be like, well, we're not going to be like the Ottomans. We're different. We're going to speak Persian. We're going to speak Farsi. It's a way to distance themselves from the Ottomans. We see that, like the Ottoman sultans, the Shahs will retain an elaborate court life. We see the use of mullahs, that's spelled Mullah. These are leaders educated in Islamic theology and law. And they will be used as mosque officials, prayer leaders, and bureaucrats. So it indicates a move away from the really militant Shia ideology towards a broader interpretation. So political expansion, territorial expansion, also means an expansion in the Shia movement. The Ottoman religious leaders considered the Safavids profoundly disturbing, a disturbing force in the Muslim world. Economically, we're going to see their greatest import will be rugs. Like, you've ever heard of a Persian rug? Yeah, the Safavids are the ones who really made those famous. So, Isfahan is going to be the capital of the Safavids. And then, of course, we have Istanbul as the capital of the Ottomans. So you can definitely draw some direct comparisons between these two empires. And that's something the AP wants you to be able to do. So, just like you have Suleiman the Magnificent for the Ottomans as the big ruler, you have Abbas the First for the Safavids. Abbas is going to be our most renowned ruler of the Safavid dynasty, and he will move the capital to Isfahan. So Abbas is going to be the guy who's ruling the Safavids when it reaches the height of its strength and prosperity. He will similarly use youths captured in Russia, because if we look at, let's look at the territory, right? They go pretty far up into Central Asia, but we also know that during this time there's a really thriving slave trade in the region, and one of the main sources of slaves is the Slavic peoples, right? That's where the word slave comes from. And so you have lots and lots of slaves coming from Russia and Eastern Europe. So the Ottomans have their janissaries, right? Christian boys from the Balkans that they make into warriors. The Safavids will use youths captured in Russia, slaves. They will educate them, convert them to Islam, and they will use them in the army and bureaucracy. They can really control the firearm use and then receive training from Europeans in an effort against the Ottomans. Abbas really wants the empire to be the center of international trade and Islamic culture, right? He really wants to restart the Silk Roads in a lot of ways and make Isfahan sort of the heart of the Eurasian land trade movement. So one of the ways he does that is to really build up Isfahan into a magnificent city. This is a trend that we're going to see across the board, whether it's the Ottomans, the Safavids, the Mughals, or even the absolutist rulers in Europe, Russia, France, is this use of monumental architecture. Maybe that's a castle like Versailles. Maybe it's going to be a mausoleum like the Taj Mahal, or a place of worship like the Blue Mosque. But it's a way for these rulers to show their power, wealth, and influence. Let's talk a little bit about Safavid society. Well, women didn't have it great there either. Women don't really have it great anywhere during this time period. Women would not be seen in public. They would have separate quarters as well, kind of like a harem. However, they would often be active in urban real estate markets, but they would have to use sort of male agents to do all of the intermediary work because they could not leave the home. But they could own property and sell property. Women would be veiled, but it's not just like you see in an Ottoman tradition where just your hair has to be covered, but like completely covered up. But we see as well, Ottoman men are very modest as well. I mean, they're wearing turbans and long sleeves and long pants and robes. We see that for men in the public life, homosexuality is not going to be allowed openly, but physical attachments between adolescent boys and grown men are going to be common. So think kind of like the Greeks in that way. Again, this is something that you kind of see throughout the world. A sexual relationship between adults and adolescents, whether it's grown men marrying like 11-year-old girls, or grown men and 12-year-old boys. So this is Isfahan. You can see the monumental buildings. It's these mosques that he builds. Here it is today. You can still see it. It's beautiful. It is a great example of monumental architecture. So if we're going to compare Istanbul and Isfahan as cities, we see that they both are really built for walking. They don't have wide boulevards to allow for wheeled vehicles to go through. They don't really have large public open spaces. So like this large park wasn't there back in the 5th century. And the streets would be very narrow and irregular, houses close together. But some differences would be geography, right? So let me go back to a map. You can see where the Safavid Empire is located. And here is Isfahan, right smack dab in the middle. Isfahan is completely landlocked, whereas Istanbul is on the Dardanelles Strait, right? It is sitting on the Golden Horn, linking the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. So that's going to allow for Istanbul to be much more diverse and cosmopolitan and a lot stronger economically. So what about the Safavid economics? Well, they are going to produce silk. They're going to produce Persian rugs. But in general, we don't see a lot of manufacturing among the Safavid Empire. They will run into a crisis just like the Ottomans will for how to pay your soldiers. And part of their economic crisis will be because of the huge influx of silver the Spanish are bringing over from the Americas that will cause inflation across the global economy. So, the demise. Well, we see that the Safavids will really reign for about 200 years. But when they start to fall, the collapse is very rapid. Abbas the First, fearing all assassinations, will remove all suitable heirs. So remember, in Islam, you don't have a tradition of primogeniture where automatically your eldest son is going to be heir. Well, if you have a bunch of really good sons, they might decide, I'm ready to be Shah now. I'm going to take dad out. So Abbas is very worried about this. So he has all of his sons either killed or incapacitated in one way, leaving his grandsons as heir. But all of his grandsons are like weak and incompetent. And so they're going to make terrible rulers, leading to the decline of the empire. The imperial administration will collapse, and in 1722, Isfahan will fall to Afghani invaders. Over 80,000 inhabitants will die from either disease or starvation. So, the Safavid Empire is going to exist for a much shorter amount of time than the Ottomans, right? The Ottomans are around for like 600 years. The Safavids are only around for about 200, but during their brief reign, they have a lot of influence. So, what kind of Islam do the Safavids practice? What is the Battle of Chaldiran? And what did Abbas the Great focus on? All right, now let's talk a little bit about the Mughals. So, the Mughal Empire is going to be a Muslim state governed in India for most of the 16th and 17th centuries. Technically, it's going to continue on after the British arrive, but it's only around in name only. Like it's not actually doing governing. So the Mughals are going to introduce a period of unified control over the Indian peninsula, ultimately laying the foundation for British colonization. And for the first 150 years of the Mughal Empire, we see it is a land of great wealth and imperial splendor. We see that there is an intention to blend Hindu and Muslim groups into an effective partnership. So, where did it come from? Well, Babur is going to found the Mughal Empire in 1528. He can trace his lineage back to Tamerlane, right? Remember him, the Timurid Empire, and thus he can trace his empire back to Genghis Khan. He is going to use gunpowder and military strategies to assert power over rivals in northern India. And as a ruler, as a Muslim ruler, he is going to be more interested in spreading his territorial control than Islam, right? He wants to expand his territory and get wealth more than he wants to tell people about Muhammad. So he's interested in art and he's interested in war, but ultimately a poor administrator. When he dies in 1530, his son will be similarly incompetent as an administrative ruler. But luckily, Akbar his grandson will take charge next, and he is going to be awesome. One of the terms you need to know in association with the Mughal Empire are zamindars. Zamindars are kind of like governors. They're warrior aristocrats, and they would be an important part of the established bureaucracy. So as sort of a governor, as a tax collector, a noble, a zamindar would have control over a territory and the villages in that territory. And it would be the job of the zamindar to collect taxes to then pass along to the emperor. These taxes might be in like cash, gold, or of course food. And it was the prerogative of the zamindar to keep 10% of the taxes for themselves. So, just like in Isfahan, Istanbul, Paris, we're going to see monument building. And one of the things we'll really see with the Mughals is not only the building up of mosques, but also of mausoleums. A mausoleum is a really fancy building to keep someone who died. So Akbar, if Suleiman was for the Ottomans, Abbas was for the Safavids, Akbar is the guy to know for the Mughals. So Akbar is going to be our most illustrious sultan of the Mughal Empire. He's going to reign between about 1556 to 1605. So all three of those guys are reigning like about at the same time. He's going to expand the empire and really pursue a policy of reconciliation with Hindus. So he will really come to power during a period of unrest. After the fall of Babur and Babur's son Humayun, the empire is really on shaky grounds. They keep on being invaded by their neighbors, and Akbar is going to come to power and really have a vision to unite all of India. He is a brilliant military leader for a guy who doesn't have a navy and will expand the empire throughout northern and central India. But unlike Babur, he wants to create societal harmony, not just expand land and get rich. So how does he do this? Well, he's going to really encourage good relationships between Muslims and Hindus. He will even marry a Hindu princess, which is pretty wow, no one would do that. You didn't see the interrelationship. So one of the things you have to remember for the Mughals that makes them really different from their other Ottoman Empire, or the Ottomans and the Safavids, is that they are a Muslim government with a Hindu majority. So most of the people they're governing are Hindu. And there are some distinct things about Islam that means they can't get along very well with their Hindu neighbors, right? Hinduism is a polytheistic religion, but it's also non-exclusive, right? So, you have a god, great, add him to the pantheon, not a big deal. Whereas we know with Islam, there's no god but God, and his final prophet is Muhammad. You can't recognize other gods. It's not just like you do you. But Akbar is going to work really hard to get rid of bad feelings between these two groups and to try and encourage harmony. So how's he going to do that? Well, he's going to encourage intermarriage between Hindus and Muslims. He is going to try to institute some reforms to help women, like widow remarriage. In the Hindu tradition, if your husband died, you could never get married again. So even if you're 12, you were married off to an 80-year-old man, he dies at 12, you're now stuck as a widow and sort of sent away from your family to live in these sort of widow homes for the rest of your life, even though you're 12, even though you're very young. So he's going to say, no, widows should remarry. He's going to discourage child marriages in general. He is going to prohibit the practice of sati. And if you remember, sati is the practice where a widow is expected to throw herself onto her husband's funeral pyre and commit suicide by immolation. And he's going to respect Hindu customs in many ways, right? Disputes between two Hindus would be decided by village law or Hindu law interpreted by scholars, whereas Sharia law would be in place for Muslims. So rather than forcing Sharia law onto Hindus, he's going to say, Hindu leaders can decide legal matters for Hindus. Muslim leaders can decide legal matters for Muslims. He will place Hindus in the bureaucracy. And in fact, he tries to sort of invent his own religion, which incorporates Islam and Hinduism, but mostly emphasizes that you should be loyal to the emperor. But out of this time, we see the religion of Sikhism emerge. Now, Akbar didn't invent Sikhism. However, we see it rise up during this time. So, the Mughals really see themselves as champions of religion. And so we see syncretism during this time. religions blending with local traditions, and we see Sikhism emerging. So Sikhism is going to blend elements of Islam, like specifically the monotheism, with Hindu concepts of karma and rebirth. Islam and Hinduism are opposite in many ways, not just on the issue of polytheism versus monotheism, but also with karma and rebirth, right? One of the things that Islam says is how you live in this life really matters, because there is a judgment day and God is going to come and judge the world, and the good will be rewarded and go to paradise, and the bad will be punished and go to hell. There's no, oh, well, you didn't do so great this time, here's a second chance, but your quality of life is worse with the caste system. You have one life, you better make it right. So let's do a quick comparison. Sorry, it's cut off a little bit there because of my recording. So Islam is monotheistic. It holds everyone as equal before God, right? Maybe socially and politically, men have more power over women. But in Islam, just like in Christianity and Judaism, salvation isn't listed. Some people don't have more access to salvation than others. Everyone, male or female, regardless of social class, has an equal chance of making it into heaven, has equal access to God. Islam is very aggressively anti-idols, right? Your only decorations will be calligraphy, right? The word of God is the most beautiful thing. You will not see images of Muhammad ever. You will not see any sort of saints, leaders represented visually. There's no statues, right? That's idolatry. Islam is a universalizing religion, which means not only will they send missionaries out, they believe that all people should be Muslim. It is an Abrahamic tradition, right? So it can trace its roots back to Abraham, just like Christianity and Judaism. It believes in a final judgment. God, at the end of time, will judge everyone on their actions. And it is an exclusive religion, which means if you believe in the God of the Muslims, you can't also believe in Buddha. You can't also be like, yeah, but I'm going to leave an offering for Ganesha. It is one God, full stop. Right? What about Hinduism? Very polytheistic, literally thousands of gods. There's a caste system, so it means everyone does not have equal access to salvation, right? A Brahmin at the top of our caste system has a much better chance of reaching nirvana than a Sudra, right? You have to work your way up the caste system before you have a chance to sort of reach paradise, to be freed of your earthly bonds. Hinduism has lots of idols, lots of statues. You would often have statues in your home, a few statues to the gods where you leave offerings to. It's an ethnic religion, so you're really born into it. They don't send missionaries out. It's a dharmic religion, which means it traces its roots back to the dharmic traditions of the Vedas and in India. They believe in reincarnation, and it's non-exclusive. Sure, you want to believe in your local god and Ganesha? Go for it. It can't hurt to leave offerings to multiple gods. All right, so then what about Sikhism? Sikhism is going to be monotheistic, but it's a little bit more open in some ways. We see that a Sikh might recognize Jesus and Buddha and Muhammad, they're all representatives of God. Wait, am I getting that mixed up with Baha'i? Don't quote me on that. I apologize if I just got that wrong. Sikhism is, however, monotheistic. There is only one God. There's not thousands of gods. Everyone in Sikhism has equal access to salvation, just like in Islam. No idols. They are also going to be anti sort of statues and idolatry. And while they're universalizing, Sikhism is not going to send out missionaries to try and convert people. So, yeah, there's only one God. I was thinking about Baha'i. I apologize. Sikhism will trace its roots back to a much more dharmic tradition as opposed to Abrahamic. They do believe in reincarnation, so you mess up in this life, you get another chance. And Sikhism is non-exclusive. It really recognizes that all religious traditions are a valid way to reach God. So, I'm just looking over my notes really fast. Oh, one of the other things that Akbar is going to do is he is going to remove the jizya. Jizya. The jizya is the tax on non-Muslims. So this is one of the ways that he tries to increase harmony over his nation. And he will, in fact, construct sort of a house of worship where he is going to preside over intellectual discussions with representatives from all religions: Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Judaism, Jainism, Zoroastrianism, Hinduism. It's kind of like what Genghis Khan did in some ways. So you can really make a comparison between how the Mughals give some autonomy to their Hindu subjects to the ways that the Ottomans will give autonomy to their Christian subjects in the Balkans with the Eastern Orthodox and Armenian Church. But I want you to think about Akbar. Who is Akbar? And what kind of reforms took place in India? Okay, let's talk about art and architecture and then the decline of the Mughals. Mughal architecture is going to blend Persian, so like Safavid, and Hindu traditions. One of the things we see is this tradition of painting miniatures, which are just tiny paintings. So you'd have whole workshops devoted to this. Mughal architecture will mix traditional Indian white marble with Islamic arches and domes. So the Taj Mahal is like the example of Mughal architecture. It will be constructed by Shah Jahan as a tomb for his most beloved wife. So it's a mausoleum, right? It's a place to honor and, keep her body. The Mughals are considered one of the peaks in Indian sort of cultural production. But after Akbar's death, we see that the subsequent rulers are just not as good. You have Jana Khadir and then Shah Jahan. Shah Jahan is not bright, but he follows Akbar's model, which works for a time. And in fact, Shah Jahan is going to have this wife, Noor, who's his 20th wife, but his favorite one. And she is actually going to be considered the power behind the throne. So once again, you see women aren't wielding direct power, but if you're an elite woman and you can have sort of influence over the sultan or the shah or the emperor, you can have some influence. So she is actually going to govern. She's going to meet with representatives, negotiate treaties, while her husband, the emperor, is drunk and high on opium. But Aurangzeb is really going to be the other guy to know. Now, Aurangzeb is a really fascinating character, and I really want you to watch the crash course on the Mughals because it's a great example of historiography. John Green is going to compare historical interpretations of Akbar and Aurangzeb. And one of the things he's going to point out is that in our modern world, we tend to prefer religious tolerance over piety, and that perhaps it is our own bias that sort of paints Aurangzeb as such a terrible ruler, whereas he was just sort of doing the best for his time, and his view on religion was different from Akbar, but Akbar wasn't perfect either. It's a fascinating video. It's a great way of showing how history is interpretation, and I do want you to watch it. So Aurangzeb is going to be like Akbar's great-grandson. He's going to come to power and have sort of two foolish goals. I mean, he's not a great ruler, but perhaps he should not be as vilified. He wants to first extend Mughal control over all of India, not just northern and central India. And he also is a very pious Muslim and views that it has been corrupted over time by Akbar and the subsequent reforms. So there is a little bit of an argument to be made here, right? Akbar kind of creates his own religion that makes himself pseudo-divine. That's not exactly in line with Muslim orthodoxy. He's going to reverse Akbar's policy of accommodation and try to reassert Muslim supremacy. So part of that and part of his piety is he's going to ban music, dancing, gambling, drinking, prostitution, and drugs from the court. Which A, sounds like a bummer, but B, one of the reasons why he wants to ban these things is because his rulers, his administrators, the people running the country, are more focused on getting high and having sex than they are actually governing, right? So he's like, no, we're getting rid of all of these distractions so we can actually focus on ruling the country. He, in fact, tells all the dancing girls, who would not only dance, but they would also be sexual partners for the men in the court, to either get married or get out. He will destroy some Hindu temples, which isn't great, and reinstate the jizya. So by the time of his death, Aurangzeb is going to conquer most of India, but he's really going to drain the treasury, protecting all of these borders, right? That's the trick. When you are constantly at war and you're expanding your country, the military cost is really high. So he's going to institute higher taxes to support his wars, and that's not going to work for the people or the zamindars. His religious policies will weaken internal alliances with the Hindus. So you have the Marathas, militant Hindus who form a breakaway state in the south and will wage guerrilla warfare against Aurangzeb, and all sort of social process in this nation will be abandoned or halted. While this is all happening, right, this is the 1700s, now it's the 18th century, the Europeans now have access to the Indian Ocean. So while this is happening, Britain and France have growing interest in India as a potential colony. So we'll actually see that Hindu groups repressed by Aurangzeb will cooperate with the British to help get him out of power, not sort of realizing where that road will lead. It's very similar to what indigenous groups in Mexico will do with the Spanish to get the Aztecs out of power. Over time, the central government will decline, and so India will really return to local governments, locally ruled by a zamindar by the late 18th century. And the Sikhs will become an anti-Muslim threat. Sikhism will be a sort of viable third option and start draining people out of Islam. So we see that in conclusion, thinking about the Indian Ocean maritime system, we see that Islam is a major governing system. It's a major cultural influence beyond just our three gunpowder empires. You have Muslims in Southeast Asia, right? Large sort of Muslim presence in Indonesia and Malaysia. On the coast of Africa, the Swahili coast, you have Muslim governments. And then you see the arrival of Europeans. So let me start again with Southeast Asia. The conversion and formation of Muslim communities will really begin in port cities and royal courts after the 14th century and be transmitted to the countryside by Sufis. Islam will function as a political ideology that strengthened resistance to European incursions, especially in the Sulu archipelago, Brunei, Aceh, and the rulers and peoples of Southeast Asian kingdoms will appear to have developed understandings of Islam that really deviated from the standards of the scholars in Mecca and Medina. So in Africa, on the Swahili coast, same thing. Islam first arrives in the port cities and then diffuses inland. However, due to the geography of sub-Saharan Africa, the people on the coastline were not actually in very close contact with the people who lived in the dry hinterlands. Cooperation is really hindered by the thick bush country, so the wilderness. And so the interior of sub-Saharan Africa really will remain animist. And then finally, we have the arrival of Europeans in the Indian Ocean. So it'll begin with first the Portuguese and then the Dutch, and then the British. By the 17th century, so by 1620, the Dutch will take over the city of Malacca and build a port on the island of Java. So it's going to be the Dutch who really colonize Indonesia, and we'll call it the Spice Islands. And they will use predominantly peaceful means to enter the Asian market and control that coffee trade. The Portuguese will arrive and basically act like pirates. You see a lot of corruption, you see a lot of violence. You will also see the establishment of tribute systems. So Asian communities had huge populations, well-established rulers, and the Europeans can't just land in India and be like, okay, we're going to conquer you, right? They're super outnumbered. So Europeans often had to accept the power of Asian rulers in order to receive permission to trade. So they instead would establish tribute regimes, basically act as pirates on the sea and say, if you want to trade, you have to pay us. Or they would rule small communities on the coastlines where indigenous peoples would live under their own rulers but pay tribute in products as they worked in coerced labor systems. So watch this video. This is a must. I want you to watch the whole thing. It gives you a good understanding of the Mughals, who are really important, and a great understanding of historiography. Let's do a couple practice questions. So, number 1. The mosque built by Shah Abbas I in the Safavid Empire and similar Islamic structures in the Ottoman and Mughal empires show that rulers All right, here's a source. Take a second to read it. All right. Which of the following is a direct result of the spread of religions and their adaptations during the period 1450 to 1750? The Mughal Empire was similar to both the Ottoman and the Safavid empires in that it was able to conquer and rule a diverse region because it What was the likely cause of Akbar's attitude towards religion as described in the excerpt? Okay, so I want you to explain continuity and changes within the various belief systems in the gunpowder empires during the period 1450 to 1750. So you can talk about the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals. Ideally, you talk about all three. So what are some of the ways that you see things continuing in their belief systems, so religions, and what are some of the changes that you see? If you have any questions, please ask. Thanks for listening.